In the opening 4 prakim of Sefer Shemot, we establish the background and actual implementation of one of the conditions made by God to Avraham at the Brit Ben HaBetarim, namely that his descendants would be enslaved in a land that is not theirs. We have the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu, and by Perek Gimel, he is a grown man. The Pharaoh of the day attempts to have him murdered, and he miraculously escapes out of Egypt and makes his way to a land of Midian. In Midian he marries, and his wife Tzipporah gives birth to his 2 sons, Gershon and Eliezer. In Perek 4, after many hundreds of years, we have a communication between God and man, the incident of the burning bush, in which he is informed that the second half of the promise made to the Brit Ben HaBetarim, namely the release of Bnei Israel from slavery, was about to begin. Subsequent to this revelation, Moshe, along with his wife and 2 children, leave Midian with the intention of returning to Egypt and leading the nation out of that land. Prior to entering Egypt, he meets with Aharon. Aharon convinces him that bringing Tzipporah and her 2 children into Egypt was not a very good idea. Tzipporah, along with her 2 children, return to Midian, while he and Aharon continue on their way into Egypt. From Perek Hey to Perek Yud Gimel, we begin with Moshe's initial attempt and lack of success in convincing Pharaoh to release the Bnei Israel from Egypt. We have the Eser Makot, beginning with the plague of Dam, ending with the plague of the killing of the firstborn, and the transmission of the first set of commandments, those relating to the bringing of the Korban Pesach. From 14 to 17 we have an account of the events that took place subsequent to their release from Egypt and their arrival at Chorev Har Sinai. The focus of Perek 18 moves over to Midian and Moshe's father-in-law Yitro, who, upon hearing the miraculous release of Bnei Israel from Egypt, along with the events of the Kriyat Yam Suf and the war with Amalek, travels from Midian and meets the Bnei Israel at Har Sinai. We have 4 subsections to Perek 18. From Pasuk Aleph to Yud Bet, we have the details regarding the arrival of Yitro. We are then introduced to one of the roles that Moshe played as leader of the Bnei Israel, that of acting as a magistrate to settle disagreements between one person and another. We have the advice that Yitro gives Moshe to decentralize the entire judicial system, and the Perek ends with the implementation of Yitro's advice. The narrative of subsection 1 is fairly straightforward. We have Yitro, along with Tzipporah, Moshe's 2 sons, travel from Midian and join the Bnei Israel in the Sinai desert. Yitro is somewhat pleasantly surprised at the welcome he receives from Moshe Rabbeinu. When Yitro settles after the long journey, Moshe recounts the miraculous events that took place on behalf of Bnei Israel, the miracles both in Egypt and during the 6 weeks following their departure. Although he knew of these events from a distance, hearing the account directly from Moshe Rabbeinu elicits an interesting response in which Yitro acknowledges the greatness of God over other forces. Baruch Hashem, he exclaims. Blessed be God, Asher hitzil etchem miyad Mitzrayim miyad Paro, the God who delivered you, saved you from the hand of Mitzrayim and from the hand of Paro. Ata yadati, now I know, now I am certain. Ki gadol Hashem mikol ha'elokim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is greater, more powerful, is the controlling force, mikol ha'elohim, from all other forces worshipped by pagan nations. And his rationale for this assertion is Ki badavar asher zadu aleihem, that method used by the Egyptians in order to annihilate the Bnei Israel, aleihem, came upon them, pointing to the fact, just as the Egyptians attempted to annihilate Bnei Israel by drowning them in the Nile River, God's response on behalf of the Bnei Israel was Mida Keneged Mida, the drowning of the Egyptian armies. The focus of the Rebbe's Sikha will be upon an interesting and somewhat puzzling statement made in Masechet Sanhedrin 94 that is somewhat critical of the actions of Moshe Rabbeinu and Bnei Israel in offering an appropriate acknowledgement for the miracles brought about by HaKadosh Baruch Hu on their behalf.